The courtroom was heavy with silence, the kind of silence that makes every breath feel louder than it should. The polished wooden benches, the American flag draped against the wall, and the sharp gavel resting just inches away from the judge's hand. All of it carried an air of authority, yet for the young black teenager standing in front of the bench, it felt less like justice and more like a battlefield. His name was Malik, only 16 years old, yet already caught in the unforgiving grip of a system designed to break spirits before they ever had the chance to rise. Malik stood with his hands clasped tightly in front of him, his voice swallowed by nerves, his body trembling not from guilt but from fear. He had been accused of something small, a minor scuffle outside a convenience store, a mistake blown out of proportion, the kind of trouble that wealthier, lighter-skinned kids often walked away from with just a warning. But Malik wasn't granted the luxury of understanding. His presence in that courtroom, his very skin, spoke louder than his words. The judge knew it, the prosecution knew it, and Malik knew it too. The judge, an older man with lines etched deep into his forehead, peered over his glasses and shook his head slowly. "Do you think this is a game?" His voice thundered through the courtroom, and Malik flinched at the sound. "Standing here like some street thug, wasting the court's time, pretending like your life even has a direction." Laughter rippled from a few observers in the back, quiet enough to avoid rebuke but loud enough for Malik to hear. The words pierced Malik's chest like shards of glass. It wasn't just a scolding. It was an attack, a public humiliation meant to strip away dignity in the name of authority. His mother, seated just a few rows behind, clasped her hands tightly in her lap, her eyes glistening with tears she refused to let fall. She had fought her whole life to keep her son safe, to teach him that he was more than what society labeled him. Yet here, in this sterile courtroom, one man's words threatened to undo years of her love and lessons. Malik wanted to respond, to speak, to explain himself, but the judge's voice crushed him before he could. "Look at you," the judge sneered. 16 years old, and already headed down the same path as so many others who look just like you. Jail, gangs, a wasted future. Do you even care about what happens to your life? Or are you content to be another statistic? The teenager's throat tightened, the tears threatening to surface, but he forced himself to stand still. He had seen what happened when black boys cried in public. The world mistook their pain for weakness, or worse, disrespect. He couldn't give them that satisfaction. So he pressed his lips together, lifted his chin slightly, and stared straight ahead, even as his heart crumbled inside him. Every word the judge spat was more than humiliation. It was a reminder of the centuries of judgment that had followed people who looked like Malik. It was a reminder that no matter how young, no matter how small the mistake, black children were rarely allowed to be children. They were labeled adults in bodies not yet grown, criminals in the making, guilty before proven innocent. Malik stood there not just as a boy on trial, but as a reflection of a much larger, painful truth. The court stenographer typed without pause, her fingers dancing across the keys, capturing the words that would live on the record. But the record would never capture the way Malik's spirit felt when those words crashed against him. The way his mother's silent prayers trembled in the air. The way an entire history of injustice seemed to press itself into that one moment. A young black public defender sat beside Malik, shifting uneasily in his chair. He wanted to object, to challenge the judge's unprofessional cruelty, but his voice felt shackled. He knew what happened when you spoke too loudly in a courtroom like this. Your career could be destroyed, your client punished more harshly, your dignity torn apart. So he placed a hand gently on Malik's arm, a small gesture of reassurance, as if to say, "You are not what he says you are. Hold on." But Malik could feel the weight of eyes on him. Every gaze in that courtroom burned with judgment, with curiosity, with that quiet disbelief that came when people saw a young black boy standing accused. He could feel himself shrinking under their stares, his shoulders tightening, his breath shallow. Yet deep within, a spark remained. A spark that reminded him of his mother's voice telling him stories of resilience, of ancestors who endured worse and still stood tall, of leaders who faced humiliation but refused to bow. The judge leaned forward now, his tone dripping with disdain. You think life owes you something? It doesn't. And if you don't learn that lesson today, the streets will teach it to you in a way you won't survive. Look at me when I'm talking to you. Slowly, Malik lifted his eyes and met the judge's glare. His gaze was steady, unblinking, filled not with defiance but with quiet strength. He wanted to say so much, that he wasn't a criminal, that he wasn't a statistic, that he wasn't who this man thought he was. But the words lodged in his throat, heavy and trapped. All he could offer was his silence, a silence that spoke volumes. His mother's heart swelled with pride even as her eyes burned with pain. She knew her son's silence wasn't surrender. It was survival. It was the dignity of a young man refusing to let his worth be decided by a stranger in a robe. And though the judge continued his tirade, speaking of wasted potential and broken futures, Malik's stillness became its own kind of resistance. The humiliation was sharp, the injustice palpable. Yet within that moment, something unexpected was born. Malik, though broken in ways the court could not see, carried himself with a resilience that no insult could erase. For every cruel word hurled at him, there existed an equal measure of love and pride carried by those who knew his heart. And while the courtroom echoed with judgment, Malik's quiet strength became a testament to something greater. The unbreakable spirit of those who endure indignity yet refuse to lose themselves in it. The gavel slammed against the block, the sound startling Malik as if it were thunder cracking overhead. The judge leaned back, satisfied in his display of power, as though the humiliation of a child was some form of justice. Malik was dismissed with conditions that weighed heavy, but what stayed with him was not the sentence itself. It was the sting of those words, words meant to scar. As Malik walked back toward his mother, her arms opened wide, pulling him into a protective embrace. She whispered into his ear, words only he could hear, words meant to heal what had been broken. You are not what he said. You are mine. You are more. And in that embrace, Malik felt something the courtroom could never provide, hope. That hope would carry him, even as the echo of humiliation lingered. It would remind him that while the world may try to strip him of dignity, true dignity is something no gavel can take away. The ride home from the courthouse was quiet. Malik sat in the back seat, his forehead pressed against the cool window, watching the city pass by in blurred streaks of gray and red. His mother drove with both hands gripping the steering wheel tightly, her lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. The silence wasn't empty. It was thick, filled with unspoken pain, frustration, and the weight of a truth too heavy for words. Malik's mind replayed the judge's voice again and again. Every word felt like a stain he couldn't wash off. Street thug, statistic, wasted future. The phrases echoed, pressing into his chest until he struggled to breathe. He wondered if everyone in that courtroom had believed it, if that was all he would ever be in their eyes. But as the car turned down their familiar street, he caught sight of children playing on the sidewalk, their laughter bright against the fading daylight. And in that small sound, Malik felt something stir, a reminder that he still had choices, that he still had a life worth living. When they arrived home, his mother finally spoke. Her voice was steady but tinged with emotion. Malik, listen to me. She turned to face him, her eyes fierce with both love and anger. What that man said today, that is not your truth. That is his prejudice, his blindness. He doesn't know you. He doesn't see the boy I raised, the boy who has a good heart and a sharp mind. He only saw your skin, Malik, and decided your story before you even had the chance to tell it. Malik swallowed hard, nodding slightly, but he didn't trust his voice enough to respond. His mother stepped closer, placing her hands on his shoulders. You don't let him win, do you hear me? You don't let the world's hatred make you believe you are less. You are my son. You are worthy. You are destined for more than this. That night, Malik lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. He thought about his father, who had been taken from their lives far too soon. Another black man swallowed by the very system that had nearly consumed him today. He thought about the neighborhood kids who looked up to him, even though he was just 16. And he thought about the look on his mother's face in the courtroom. Not just pain, but pride. Pride in the way he had held his head high despite the humiliation. That thought kept him from breaking. That thought gave him strength. The days that followed were difficult. At school, whispers traveled faster than truth. Some kids mocked him for getting into trouble, repeating rumors they didn't understand. Teachers looked at him differently, their patience thinner, their expectations lower. The humiliation he had suffered in that courtroom began to follow him like a shadow. Yet Malik refused to fold. He threw himself into his studies with a determination that surprised even him. If the judge thought he was destined to be a failure, Malik would prove him wrong. Not just for himself, but for every young black boy who had ever been told the same lie. It wasn't easy. There were days Malik wanted to give up, days when the weight of judgment was too much to bear. But each time, his mother reminded him of his worth. Each time, he remembered the quiet strength he had felt in that courtroom when he met the judge's glare without blinking. And slowly, Malik began to understand that resilience was not about avoiding pain. It was about enduring it without letting it define you. One afternoon, months later, Malik found himself back in that same courthouse. This time, he wasn't standing as a defendant. He was there as part of a youth advocacy program his public defender had introduced him to. The very lawyer who had sat beside him in silence had reached out weeks after the trial, inviting Malik to join a group of young people working to challenge the injustices of the juvenile system. At first, Malik had hesitated. The memory of the courtroom was too raw, too humiliating. But his mother encouraged him. "Maybe this is how you fight back," she had said. And so Malik agreed. Now, as he walked into the building again, his heart pounded. The same walls, the same benches, the same stale smell of paperwork and polished wood. All of it came rushing back. But this time he wasn't standing alone. He was surrounded by other young people, each carrying their own stories of being dismissed, belittled, or judged unfairly. Together, they formed a circle of resilience, a chorus of voices refusing to be silenced. When it was his turn to speak at the program's forum, Malik's hands shook. He glanced at his mother in the audience, her face shining with encouragement, and then he began. His voice was soft at first, but with each word, it grew stronger. He spoke of the humiliation, of the way the judge's words had cut deeper than any sentence could. He spoke of the nights he lay awake questioning his worth, and of the strength he found in his mother's love. And then he spoke of the choice he had made, not to let that moment define him, but to let it ignite him. "I was called a statistic," Malik said, his voice steady now. "But I refused to be one. I was told I had no future, but I'm here today to say I do. And so do all of us. We are more than what they see. We are more than what they say. We are not broken, we are rising." The room fell silent. For a moment, Malik feared he had said too much. But then applause erupted, filling the chamber with a sound he had never expected to hear in this building. It wasn't the sound of judgment or humiliation. It was the sound of affirmation, of recognition, of hope. The same courthouse that had once stripped Malik of his dignity now bore witness to his strength. And in that moment he understood something profound. Dignity is not granted by judges, juries, or systems. Dignity is carried within, nurtured by love, strengthened by resilience, and made unshakable by truth. As Malik left the building that day, he felt lighter. The scars of humiliation were still there, but they no longer defined him. Instead, they had become reminders of what he had endured and what he had overcome. His journey was far from over. There would be more battles, more moments when the world tried to tear him down. But Malik had found his voice, and with it, the power to stand tall. His story spread, first within the advocacy group, then through local community organizations, and eventually to people far beyond his neighborhood. Malik became a symbol, not of brokenness, but of resilience. He showed that even in the face of humiliation, dignity could not be erased. And though the judge who had mocked him likely forgot that day, for Malik, it would never be forgotten. It had become the turning point of his life, the moment he realized that pain could be transformed into power, that silence could become strength, and that no one, not even a judge, could define his worth. Malik's story was not just his own. It was the story of countless young black lives. Lives judged too quickly, dismissed too easily, and yet filled with immeasurable potential. His journey stood as a reminder to anyone who listened, that the fight for justice is not just about laws and courts, but about hearts and dignity. It is about refusing to let humiliation define who you are. And so Malik walked forward, not as a victim of that courtroom moment, but as its survivor. Not as a statistic, but as a living testament to resilience. His life was proof that even in the face of unbelievable humiliation, dignity can roar louder than any gavel.